use the sitar to kind of bring out a little bit of my personal story and a little bit of my background. So a lot of you might know my parents come from a small country called Guyana in the West Indies. And I think very few of you know how we actually ended up with family in Guyana, because obviously our cultural background is from India and our forefathers are from India. But one of the things I was researching for this show is, how did Indians end up in Guyana, and how did they end up in places like the Mauritius and Fiji and all these other places where you find people of the Indian diaspora. So I'm very lucky that I've got a letter from my nana, from my mum's father, who's my grandfather, kind of explaining the history of how my mum's side of the family made it from India to Guyana. It's a quite interesting story about how my grandfather's grandfather was a priest back in India, and there were a lot of rituals and superstitions happening at that time in India. And when my grandfather's grandfather passed away, his wife had to escape from India, and the local sort of head of the village organized for my grandfather's grandmother and her two children to board the ship and to kind of escape to this country called Guyana, which was like so far out of the way. The story of how my dad's family ended up in Guyana is very similar to a lot of other people from the Indian diaspora who have their roots in India, and then at the abolition of slavery, they still wanted a lot of laborers to kind of go to these countries. And after the end of slavery, this sort of indentured servitude system came up where they would sort of get people from India to go and work in the plantations in the different fields. So I guess those are the two sides of my parents and my parents' history. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my origins, and I hope you'll appreciate this, what I think is a well-themed kind of introduction to how my parents ended up from India into Guyana. So yeah, that's the story of how my parents ended up from India in Guyana.